Welcome down to my 9-foot homemade oak bar. Pour yourself a cold one. You are listening to Bucs in the Basement. My name's Chris, and Craig here is the biggest Pirates fan you'll ever meet. Let's talk Pirates baseball now. Welcome to Bucs in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. We'll never know.
And the Pirates have taken the first game of the series from the Big Red Machine. I don't even know what place we're in at this point in time. We're talking about wild cards and where we're at in the NL Central standings. But instead of doing that, I am going to bring on, for the first time, from Rumbunter. He is the co-editor and site expert. I started reading his stuff back in his Diamond Digest days. Ethan Fisher at eFisher330. Hopefully that was his batting average for his baseball team in high school, maybe. I'm not really sure.
Yep.
Ethan,
Middle
how
school,
you doing
yeah.
today, brother? Middle school?
I'm doing good. Yeah, doing good. Thanks for having me on. This is awesome.
Yeah, like I said, reached out to you, and I'm glad that you took the opportunity to come on here and talk some Pirates. Ethan's part of the Pirates Twitter community, gets into some good conversations, starts a little bit of trouble from time to time. I'm going to read one of his most recent tweets. I find it really funny when the Pirates make a decision that everyone deems fireable and indefensible, and it ends up working. And people just started lighting him up, and he's just like, can we just be happy that we won? Like, it's just like, guys, this is Twitter. This is X. This is not like real life.
Yeah, I didn't get yelled at too bad for that one. I've gotten some pretty nasty stuff. That one went over pretty well, all things considered.
Yeah, I think a couple people came to your defense. I liked it. I was just like, oh, having a good time with it. I made a tweet this past weekend about Jared Jones and his 4.79 ERA and 1.50 whip. And, called it clickbait and different things like that. The guy's a rookie, has been struggling a little bit. The one thing I did notice is first 7 starts, 5 walks total. Last 7 starts, 17 walks total. So that command that he had problems with in the minors could be resurfacing to a degree. They might also not be chasing as much stuff. I'm not really sure exactly what the stuff is going on. And also, he's at almost 80 innings, and he's 22 years old, and he's pitching in the major leagues. So, Ethan, we're going to be talking, some different stuff here. The biggest thing here right now is 35 and 37, hovering around 500. And I tried to search back through your timeline and different stuff. Did you have a prediction or a projection to start the season, like what you thought the Pirates would end up at?
I had him right at 81 wins at the beginning of the season and just a couple games out of a playoff spot. Yeah, I think that's about where we're looking right now. 81 wins might be a little optimistic based on where we're sitting now, but I mean, half the National League is below 500 and in a playoff spot. So it's still a crapshoot at this point.
Yeah, it's a really weird thing because I just basically said, I was between 78 and 82. I landed on 80. I know that there was some conversation during the winter meetings and different stuff where they said, the goal is approximately 84 wins. They thought that would be a place to get them into, a playoff hunt. But the thing I really took from it is that, as long as we stay within striking distance, then that's kind of staying within, Ben Cherington's goal. Do you see it that way as well?
I do. And I think that's part of the problem, honestly. Being within striking distance, that's a subjective thing for one. But number two, it's in the Cherington tenure, we really haven't seen them go for it yet. And part of my thing has been, well, I'm going to give them a pass until we know that they're going for it. And if they're obviously going for it and they still stink, then, that's a problem. But, it's hard to tell when they're going for it, when they're not going for it. So it's really hard to tell, when they're actually going to push in the chips and when, they consider good enough to, actually do something aggressive.
Well, and I would just like to ask you, like, with the pushing into the chips, are we talking about like, making some trades? I had some discussions with some people, like, and kind of akin to 2012, 2013, some acquisitions they made to actually improve the team. Some of them worked out, some of them didn't. Wandy Rodriguez pitched well for a little while, ended up getting injured. Gabby Sanchez wasn't a huge pickup, but at the time it was seen as improving the team. And Travis Snyder, it took a couple years before he even became like, what we would see as a regular player on the team, was still kind of more of a fourth outfielder, but it made the team better. I'm just curious, is that the type of like moves that we're talking about, or are we talking about more of like off-season moves coming up?
I mean, either one, honestly. I think they're at the point this year where they need to seriously consider doing something more aggressive in terms of improving the offense. Because if you look at where the Pirates are at starting pitching wise, they can win a playoff series or two. And I don't think that's a very controversial statement. But just with how inconsistent the offense is, I think you can point to 3 or 4 spots on the field where it'd be pretty easy to get an upgrade. And I still think they have the prospects to, make something like that happen. So I think they should do something, make a move or two in July, and then keep it going in the offseason for sure.
Yeah, and that's where the thing is at. I mean, I know that, Pirates fans will be a little bit pessimistic until that type of thing happens. I'm the same way myself. I'm not going to, say, unless they do something. I always go with I'm going to prepare to be underwhelmed. And when I'm, not, I mean, everybody remembers, when the stadium erupted when the Chris Archer trade was announced, because the fans actually felt like the team was going for it. Obviously that trade did not work out in the end. Once again, with a pitcher, very volatile, gets injured and doesn't perform as well. Even if he performed, he wasn't having his best year even when we traded for him. But even if he performed like that, the trade would have obviously looked better. But I do understand, from a fan standpoint, because I'm a fan as well, it's a fan-run show, that, I want to see them do something. I'm just like, okay, I hear people saying I want to see this trade happen, but I also want to see it work out, or we'll hold it against Cherington. Like, I can't hold the Archer trade really against Huntington in any way, because he was actually going for it, something that we've been begging for and wanting them to do. There's some names out there. There's a lot of big names. I mean, Luis Robert Jr. is one that's on everybody's radar. Pete Alonso is another one. Vlad Guerrero Jr. Taylor Ward is more in the wheelhouse for me, because I feel like that would still be a splash, but it would be, not in that same level. So, and I know that like Cherington has built this, prospect pipeline and stuff like that. But when I was like talking to you about what we were going to be talking about, and I was talking about the IL, like the Pirates IL this year has been absolutely insane. I mean, you got Henry Davis and Joey Bart both on the IL. You've got, Martin Perez, hopefully working his way back. Baraki, Alika, Bay, Marco, Quinn, Hunter Stratton, and then you got Endy Oviedo and Moretta, out for this, those guys, the last 3 out for the year. So, I mean, I feel like, some of this is, reinforcements to back up, some, unexpected injuries, and then some people just haven't been performing.
Yeah, I think you're in a really tough spot pretty much anytime you have 3 catchers and 4 starting pitchers on the injured list. That just puts you in a really tough spot, especially when, number 1, the catchers that leaves you with are Yasmani Grandal and Jason DeLay, and number 2, when that leaves you with only 4 major league starting pitchers. I think they were really ill prepared for something like that to happen, even with being as aggressive as they were with getting Jared Jones and Paul Skeens to the major leagues.
Yeah, the delay injury, I mean, how early it happened in the season. If anybody listens to our program, you know that me and Chris ran through, Yasmani Grandal's injuries. And I'm honestly just waiting for another one to pop up with him. Davis with a concussion, kind of unexpected. Bart with the finger, kind of unexpected. But really, I mean, you had to actually go out and get Bart because of Grandal's injury. You went out and got Grandal because of Endy's injury. So, I mean, there's just a lot of different stuff that's piling up. And then you have, in my estimation, Davis, everybody was saying, of course, Shelton's going to say he's ready to come back up. He did what we needed him to do and different stuff like that. But, I mean, he was striking out at a pretty high clip still in AAA, even though he was hitting for power. He is, a natural pull hitter, but I was actually kind of excited. I'm sorry that he's injured right now, because when he did hit that home run, it was to, right center field. So it's still considered possibly like a pull side, but to me, if he can do stuff like that, then that can be, better than hitting those, hard screaming grounders just inside the bag. But I mean, we don't know when we're going to see that. And then Delay is he's a fine backup. I mean, I hate to talk about him like that. It's like he's a major league catcher. I believe that Jason Delay is a major league catcher, but I just believe that he is better suited to catch, 30 to 35 games, maybe 40, as opposed to now he's probably your better option just because Grandal is, just not hitting whatsoever. And
totally out of it defensively too, just even mentally, like, you never even know what he's doing half the time.
Yeah, that thing that happened when he was just like tossing the ball back to Jones, like everybody called it a little league play, and it is. Like I was telling you before I hopped on here, I was down at my son's little league game coaching, and we've seen a couple times where like some of our better players are able to steal home because guys just kind of wandering back to the mound, lollipop tosses, different stuff like that. So that clearly is a very, little league play. And especially since if the third baseman's not holding him on, it's the catcher's job to at least, keep that player honest. And he absolutely didn't. So now you're saying like now it's like Jason Delay is the best option you have right now. And once again, no offense to Jason Delay, but in a major league team, especially when you have guys that you already have, Michael A. Taylor, who's a defensive specialist. You have Brian Hayes, who is normally a defensive specialist, but I don't know if anybody's looked it up right now. He's 0 outs above average at this point in time for the season. And his DRS is defensive runs saved is not looking much better for a guy that, usually totals, 20 to 24 like defensive runs saved a season, and outs above average is usually a leader. So you have a lot of guys that in Triolo, defensive specialists, stuff like that. So then Delay's just another, soft hitting defensive specialist.
Yeah, and going back to Hayes, I just looked it up. He's playing at a pace of 9 defensive runs saved across the season, which is still really good. But at the same time, that would comfortably be the worst he's ever performed. And we've already seen him on the injury list a couple weeks ago with a back, I think it was. And I have a feeling he's going to be on his way back there. He hasn't hit like all year. I'm worried that it's still bothering him and that he's going to end up having to go back on the injured list.
Yeah, Ethan, I think you're right on with that. I mean, you look at the games that he's played. Of course, I think it was 2021. It was the wrist injury, diving back in against the Cubs. But after that, it's always been the back. And then last year, he gets hot, goes on for a month, comes out torrid. And I know that, some of that is in the swing changes, different stuff like that. But at this point in time, I'm just questioning how much of that is health. Like, I feel like if you have a healthy Brian Hayes, then you have that shot. But, with the, injury and a back injury that, keeps on popping back up, what are the chances of having, a healthy Brian Hayes? It's almost like that every single year you should just plan a month shutdown for him just to try to keep him healthy for the entire season. I mean, I don't want to do that, but at this point in time, I mean, he's not really pulling the ball a ton. And when he is, it's something I've talked about a million times. He hit one to like right center field the other night, and they're like, man, that should have been a gapper, but the guy was fading him to that spot. And I'm like, well, he's fading him to that spot because he doesn't pull the ball. So it takes away like, a third of the field with the way that he's hitting.
Yeah, looking at his numbers this year, his average exit velocity is the worst of his career. His hard hit rate's the worst of his career. His pull percentage is the worst of his career. His ground ball rate is the second worst of his career. I mean, he looks nothing like he did in the second half of last year.
No, it's not really, even close. It has looked like a shell of himself, and like you said, it kind of feels like one of those injuries could be coming back on. And I mean, you do have Triolo that can play that position defensively. I think Nick Gonzalez can probably play it better than most people think that he could. I think that his second best position is probably third base, and they did play him some of that in the minors as well as during spring training. But like I said, it's another, if you have Triolo there, it's, soft hitting defensive guy, and you're kind of looking like where this power's coming from. I know that people like, I love Kutch, and, he has made me eat a little bit of my words by, turning it on at this point in time in the season. But when he is leading your team in home runs, that's really not a great thing. Especially when you're expecting, guys to not only get to 20 home runs or 25 home runs, but, build upon the years that they've had. And that's where I had sent you a message about like the polar opposite performances of this team. And it's also polar opposite performers of the players. I mean, you're looking at, I brought up an example, like we lose to Detroit 0-8 in the first part of the doubleheader, and then we win 10-2. We lose on Saturday 4-16, probably the most embarrassing loss of the season.
To the Rockies, no less.
Yeah, to the Rockies, nonetheless. It's not even like, I could see if we got lit up by Atlanta that way. I remember back when I think it was 2021 or 2022, we got it was like 24-3 or something against Atlanta. I could see that happening against that powerful of a team. And then, like I said, coming and keeping that momentum going and then winning, against the Reds in the first game we've played them this year. But it's like, it's the inconsistencies. Like we're 35-37. I mean, it kind of, everything they do kind of matches the team that we're seeing on the field right now.
Yeah. And it's not even like, if you look at the main, offensive contributors, I'm talking mainly Brian Reynolds, O'Neal Cruz, Brian Hayes specifically. It seems with all three of them, even over the last couple of years, whenever they're really good, they're really good. And then whenever they're bad, they're really bad. And it feels like those stretches always last for, a week or two at a time. And then they'll just go back to the other one. It just feels like nobody on the team ever has any semblance of consistency at all. And I feel like a lot of that goes back to, the hitting coach who, if you search my Twitter, I've certainly said some things about the hitting coach.
Are you a fan of the Pittsburgh Pirates and supporting small businesses? If so, Bucs in the Basement has you covered. Introducing the Bucs in the Basement VOUCH store with products from places like Split Rock Coffee. Coffee with a purpose. Established, owned, and operated by disabled veterans sworn to protect America. Or Camp Craft Cocktails. More than cocktails. It's a mission to build longer tables where everyone is welcome. We try and vouch for these products. Bucs in the Basement, proudly brought to you by VOUCH. Visit our VOUCH store at bucsinthebasement.com or simply click on the link in the show notes. I did want to point out the one thing, like, I know that he's taking some flack right now because, Rowdy went and talked to his dad and, talked to a former instructor with the Blue Jays. And it never is a good look when that type of stuff happens. But for some reason, whenever that was said, the first thing I thought of is every single time Adam Frazier would go on a tear, Greg Brown would mention, his dad called him after and showed him video and different stuff like that. I definitely agree that something has to change with this hitting philosophy, or at least the execution of this hitting philosophy. Because in its in its the way you think about it is that, you take walks, you get hits. If you strike out, it's an out. It's no worse than grounding to second base or whatever it may be. But if you don't have that power element where guys get on base and you can drive them in quickly, or at least, have the sluggings up there. When you see, Nick Gonzalez is, one of the only players, or I think maybe the only player other than Joey Bart in a small sample size, up over an 800 OPS. And you have people setting their watches by the fact that once June rolls around, Brian Reynolds is going to heat up. I mean, some of that stuff, it's just you need one of those players that can be like the slump buster. Just like when you want a pitcher that can end that streak. It's okay, we have a guy that's going to step on the mound and the losing streak ends today. And that's been a good thing for the Pirates this year. I mean, everybody will point back to AJ Burnett because, you went on a 3-game losing streak. It's AJ's turn up. Your chances of winning that game are better. I mean, at least now we have, Skeens, who pitched another great performance, Mitch Keller, who's been doing very well outside of, his last 2 starts in the first inning of the year. Bailey Falter has contributed very well. Jared Jones, has done, even within those struggles, he did, perform very well against the Dodgers. So you do have those guys that can do that, but it doesn't kind of seem like that the Pirates, have that consistent hitter that will basically be okay, if the rest of the team goes into a slump, I'm going to put this team on my back. I think I tweeted out when I was, put out my thing about Jared Jones. I said, the one thing I worry about this team when I look back on it, because everybody's going to compare, this team to the last team that made the playoffs and the last team that did a full, on rebuild. I basically said, I don't know if we have a 25-year-old Andrew McCutchen on this team. And I think that's where this missing piece is at. If Gonzalez could be that, I don't want to put that pressure on him. That would make things so much easier. Or, if Cruz could start to turn it on in the second half, I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt to a degree, just because of having a full year off. But if he could be that guy, but for right now, it just doesn't seem like it's okay, when nobody was hitting. And now it's great that, a lot of people are hitting, but what about if they go back into that slump again? Who's going to be that player to step up?
Yeah. And it goes back to what you said about, McCutchen leading the team in home runs. This is the team that led Major League Baseball in home runs in spring training. Henry Davis looked unbelievable in spring training. O'Neal Cruz looked really good. Jack Sawinski looked really good. Rowdy Tellez looked all right. Michael A. Taylor looked all right. And now, nobody looks anything like they did. We've already seen Henry Davis and Jack Sawinski be so bad that they had to go to the minor leagues. And it's just, it's really bad. And I don't understand how, Andy Haynes gets this long of a leash. That's also part of my concern with, having trouble, how the Pirates view how urgent they need to be here in trying to make this competitive. How much of a leash does Andy Haynes get? Because also part of his whole thing was the allure to hiring him was his, organizational philosophy. It wasn't just, in the major league team. It was an organizational wide philosophy. and we've seen a lot of really good, hitting prospects come through the system. They come to Pittsburgh, and outside of what Nick Gonzalez is doing right now, I don't know that really anybody has, reached the level that we thought they would. And now if you look at the state of the farm system now, I mean, Termarr Johnson has had a pretty good last couple of weeks, but outside of that, where's the offense, even in the minor leagues? So I don't think it's just a major league problem. I think it's an organizational problem there as well.
I can't disagree with you, Ethan, because I do the minor league news and brews. I talk to all the broadcasters, watching the minor leagues all the time. A prospect that hit at almost every level, like a Sung-Chae Chang, has been struggling this year, just getting his OPS, up near 700 at this point in time. You have, Termarr Johnson doing the same thing. And, that's where like my worry starts to come in a little bit, because I was saying I projected, let's say 80 wins and being near a 500 team and staying around this. A lot of this that we had talked about and Chris and I had talked about was staying around 500 until, around the All-Star break, when, the reinforcements would really be pushing in, when, we didn't know, we thought Skeens was going to come up later and that he would really be getting his footing. That you would have, hopefully, Nick Gonzalez come up and be hitting at least one of those guys. We said it had to be either, Gonzalez, Piguero, anybody, just name anybody. It would just have to be one of those players at the AAA level. Well, all of those reinforcements are already here. I mean, you do have like a Braxton Ashcraft, which, I've discussed, what I think is going to happen with him. I've gone back and forth with some of the guys on Twitter, like, Nola Jeffy and Anthony Murphy, guys that I respect their opinions a lot as far as it comes to the minor league teams and the minor league players. But my thing is just that, okay, I'm seeing, a cap that is going to look like, I don't know. They're saying like 130, and I'm thinking like 120 is like of the innings pitched for Braxton Ashcraft, and he's already pitched a lot right now. Everybody's excited that Mike Burrows is coming back, making an appearance in the FCL and starting his rehab and everything, which kind of became a surprise because they hadn't mentioned him for about 3 weeks, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, he should be starting regular games in July. Yeah. But even with him, when guys have come back from Tommy John, like it's usually about 50 innings is like the cap, in that first half season back or whatever it would be. So, and like you said, the hitting prospects. I mean, if you look at the AAA team, the AA team, I mean, there's not a hitting prospect that I would trust to bring up and think that they would, be able to be plugged and played and provide, anything better. Because somebody's just like, well, why is Triolo still up here? And I'm like, well, Piguero hasn't been hitting. Yeah. So it's just like, they brought Gonzalez up, somebody will say, why isn't, Gorski up? And it's just like, well, Gorski, I know he's hitting a lot of home runs. There's a lot of power. And that could provide the spark, but then I look at his K rate and it's just
it's really bad.
It's really bad. I mean, he's up over 30%, like doesn't really walk a ton. And that was the issue that, Nick Gonzalez fixed during this offseason, because we saw what happened when he came up. He was hitting well in AAA last year, but when he came up, those strikeout numbers, came back to haunt him, and now he's having success because he's kind of worked on that. I mean, obviously small sample size, up over 100 plate appearances, but now it's like, okay, now what's he going to look at it like, 250 plate appearances. So it's like, where's that next number? And the numbers between the 130 some plate appearances or 120 some plate appearances he's at now, and he gets to 250 and he struggles, those numbers aren't going to look so great. So, I mean, he does have a way to go at that, but people are like, because there's honestly nobody to replace them with. And the thing that frustrates me the most, like I'm going to go on a tangent here for just 2 seconds, is that people are actually frustrated that Rowdy's hitting. If anybody's frustrated that Rowdy is hitting, I do not get the way that you fan. I will never, tell you, you can do that. You can question it, but I can also question how you fan, because it's just like, if he's hitting, that means there's a better chance for the team to be winning. And I do not believe that Rowdy Tellez, if he continues to hit, I think he honestly could play his way out of Pittsburgh easier than, playing his way to the end of the season in Pittsburgh. And even if he does and he continues to hit, like I said, why is that a bad thing?
Mm-hmm. And it's still hard to tell really who Rowdy Tellez really is as a hitter. He's obviously, I shouldn't say obviously because people won't agree with that, but I don't think he's the 460 OPS, whatever he was through the end of May, but he's also not the 1100 OPS he's been since June 1st. It's still hard to tell where he falls in the middle of that. And even, with him having a good month, he still only hit 1 home run this month. This was a guy who hit 35 home runs, 2 years ago, and he's still at 2 for the year. So, I understand people being wary of him playing well, number one, just because they don't believe it's real, and number two, they can still probably do better at first base than Rowdy Tellez if they really wanted to. If the opportunity presented itself to go get somebody better, I don't think Rowdy Tellez should be the kind of person to get in the way of that. But at the same time, if he's, playable for the next couple of weeks, you can, reallocate those resources elsewhere.
Yeah. And I mean, and the other part is that, Connor Joe has come back down to earth a little bit.
Yeah.
Like he kind of always does. I mean, the water will find its level. I believe that, Connor Joe has improved over his time in Colorado. I think he's one of those kind of like little bit of a late bloomer type player, but he's going to fall right around by the end of the year, probably that, league average to just above league average hitter, which is not a bad thing, with a little bit of power, and it has versatility to, give some outfielders some rest, give the first baseman a rest. So he's a is a good player to have on your team. But, I was worried about that happening. It's like, okay, you do have to play him at first because Rowdy was playing so bad, but you can only play him for so long, because at some point in time, he gets overexposed as a player because, people know he's going to watch pitches. He's like Andy Haynes's protege in some ways. I feel like it's just that he is a guy that is going to take, a ton of pitches and different stuff like that. But like, I'm just trying to think here. So we're thinking you got to add it first. You would think you got to add a catcher, possibly an outfielder, and then some bullpen help. Like, I mean, we're going to have to, that'd be making a decent amount of moves, which before I let you go here, because we are 30 minutes of Bucs, but once I start talking Pirates, I could talk for like 2 hours. But my question is to you, and we can kind of discuss this for the next few minutes, is what would you prioritize if you agree with me that those are the needs?
I will side with you and give the mulligan to Rowdy Tellez and let him figure it out at first base. Let him and Connor Joe be the platoon at first base. He can have that. I think you can find 2 playable catchers between what they have right now. I'm not convinced that Henry Davis is one of those top 2, which is a problem. But I think between what they have, you can find 2. I would go get an outfielder, and I would get a relief pitcher. I think we're at the point, and I wrote about this earlier today with Paul Skeens and Jared Jones, where they're going to have to manage their innings if they're going to be able to, number one, survive the whole season, and number two, even be there in October, should the Pirates be lucky enough to get there. And I think to do that, you're probably going to have to go prolonged stretches of a 6-man rotation to stretch them out. And you're going to have a more reliable bullpen outside of, the 3 or 4 guys that they have back there right now, outside of the Bednar, Chapman, Holderman. I'll throw Luis Ortiz in there as a good 4th guy. Outside of that, it's really iffy, which is a real shame given how good the bullpen was last year. So I would prioritize getting another bullpen arm.
Yeah, and I can't disagree with that. I mean, the big thing here is like Luis Ortiz, these last two, like a couple times through the rotation, has been like the de facto, fifth starter in what he's done. For some reason, the Pirates can pull that type of thing off. They did it for 2 months last year and actually had, like a winning record for that period of time. But I mean, eventually it's just like, you can't start it this early in the season. What Ortiz has done has been great. But I also feel like that he was showing some stuff as being like the multi-inning guy in the bullpen as well, with, a starter going like 5 or 6 innings or something. He's a guy that could also save your bullpen that way. I mean, Fleming, we saw him pitch well in Miami. We saw him pitch well in Colorado, and we didn't see him do, a ton of great stuff in between there. Yeah, the bullpen, and I think I pointed this out to Chris one of the last times I was on with him, was just that basically, I mean, the Orioles did it last year to get Grayson Rodriguez, to the, to the postseason. And I don't disagree with you. I feel like that at some point in time, that's where it's just like, I mean, I feel like if you're going to like, I hate like the shutdown and ramp up and anything like that. But I think if you're going to time that perfectly, it's almost like that you would almost want to, I don't want to say this, is maybe like slow Ashcraft down a little bit, because I mean, he's built up to like 7 innings and stuff, and maybe back off of that a little bit to have him be that 6th guy in the rotation or something. Because if not, like once again, I mean, we're looking down to the minor leagues. You have Ashcraft, and then you have at Indianapolis. I mean, they just brought in some guys that are playing, but and have at least in a couple starts pitched okay. But I mean, even at that, I mean, you're looking at, then you're going to, Domingo Germán, who has not pitched very well at all. And the other part is that you have him signed for next year as well. So it's a role he could play maybe next year, but not this year. But yeah, I mean, I can't disagree with that. And as far as the outfield goes, I mean, you have guys with options. You have Edward Olivares, and if he has options, Jack Sawinski has options. Michael A. Taylor, I would love to have him as like a late inning defensive specialist, but not somebody you're starting all the time. So yeah,
he's playing the best defense of his career at 33. It's remarkable.
Yeah. No, he looks great out there. And the thing I always say is that he makes the hard plays look so easy. So when other players are diving for stuff, he's the guy that's underneath it, just kind of making the catch. But the advanced metrics can tell that, oh my God, the read that he made and the jump that he made, made that such an easy play. But that's also a very valuable thing to have, on a ball club, and something that you need. But when you have, the rest of your outfield, aside from Brian Reynolds catching heat here, in June, you don't really have those, offensive producers that you would need from the outfield.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would go so far as to say I think it would be worth it to make a real push for Luis Robert or Jazz Chisholm or somebody in that category. I think like what you said earlier about how they need to have that impact, the slump stopper in that lineup. I think it would be worth it to, make the splash to get one.
Yeah, I mean, I can't disagree. I mean, I could with Luis Robert Jr., the injury history scares me a little bit, just with the hip flexor, both times, landing out for a little bit of time. But it's even, I hear what you're saying, though, because it's like that type of player. We need to go get, that type of player that can impact. And we know that when he's on the field, he will impact it. So I can't disagree with that whatsoever. But guys, we're up against it here. I definitely want to thank Ethan for coming on. Definitely do go read, anything that Ethan writes over there at Rumbunter. Follow him. I told you before that, Rumbunter has a bad rap at times on X, and I wanted to also bring you on here to show that like this is run by it's actually not. I feel like that there were some takes that people took the wrong way, certain things that there was different discussions and stuff, Ethan. But when I saw that you were taking over there and the stuff that I had read from you at Diamond Digest, I was happy to see you in that role, and I like to see the stuff that you're writing. So who anybody that doesn't, go follow him and read his stuff. And Ethan, would love to have you back on here again sometime.
Yeah, I'd love to do it again. This was awesome.
Yeah, definitely a good time, everybody. Like I said, everybody go listen, go read, and I don't think the Pirates are making a move just yet, but you never know.